Hello guys, I'm Maryann Kyle and I'm coming to you today from the Alabama School of the Arts on the campus of the University of Mobile. And today I'm joining you because I want to share my thoughts on the culture of practice as a music major. I train a lot of teachers on how to set up a positive culture inside their studio, and oftentimes the culture that they have is set by their past culture, the things that they experienced when they were students in the studio. And so I talked this past week to some of my students about remembering something that I find really important. You see, when we leave high school and we're considering actually majoring in music, we come out with what I call the why. And that is, why do you want to do this? Well, it's always an emotional reason. I love it. It touches people. It makes me happy. And so we leave high school with the why in our hands and we go into music school. And there we're introduced to one of our most powerful mentors, our voice teacher or our instrumental private instructor, and they begin to talk about the what. See, the what is, what are we going to do for a career? How are we going to take this thing that we love so much and actually make it practical so we can pay our bills at the end of the month? And so depending on your teacher's past experience or bias, they may say to you, the what is a career. And depending on how their career might have progressed or might not have, they'll start to talk to you about how much practice you have to do and how hard it is to be a major and how you really must perfect your technique, because perfection is the goal so that you are a master of your technique. And that is the what. That's what you think about. And then they hand you tools. So the tools that are given to you by your teachers, that's the how. And so you had the why. And depending on your teacher's mentorship and their culture, you go into the practice room concentrating on the what and using the how. Now think about this for a minute. When you got into the practice room for the first time, did you feel as though perfection was the goal? Was the word mastery of your technique and perfect in your language? If so, did you leave frustrated? Did you go in and try to accomplish too many things at once and leave angry and perhaps not feeling particularly good about your singing voice? If that's the case, then you found over time that you began to lose the why. And what becomes more important is to take the how and get to the what, the career, as quickly as possible. How is mastering your vocal technique showing up these days in your practice time? And how is it showing up in your stage time? Well, let's start first with performance. Let's talk about the culture of singing. Oftentimes in master classes, when I ask students, the very first question when I'm working with them is, what do you like about your voice? And 9 times out of 10, they just stare at me because they never have been asked that question, and oftentimes they're thinking that I'm taking the negative inventory before the positive inventory. And they'll struggle with the answer, and oftentimes, particularly in a diligent student, I'll hear these things. Well, I think my breath support is very good, and I think that I have an excellent command of my range. And most of those answers that they give me are related to their vocal technique. But they've lost the emotional reason why they do this. What do you like about your voice? I always say, I know what I like about my voice. I feel my voice as a singer and as a teacher as truthful and honest. And so when I stand on stage to deliver a performance, I don't think about being a singer. I think about letting my voice be truthful and honest so that I have an emotional connection, and thus the audience does as well. So that is my culture of singing. But what is yours? When you're sitting in an audience and you're viewing a performance not as a performer but as an audience member, what do you think? And more importantly, how do you feel? Because physical empathy is the most powerful motivator of strong emotion in an audience member. That is, when you're listening to someone perform and watching, your body will have a physical reaction to what they're doing. If that physical reaction is causing you to hold your breath and be fearful because of what you're watching, that is your physical empathetic reaction to their singing. Now, if you're flipping the script and you're standing on stage and your mind is totally focused on your technique, how does that present in the body, and how will the audience members receive that physically? They will take that inventory more quickly than anything they see or hear. So think about how you think about the culture of your own singing before you consider the culture of your practice. Is it difficult for you to answer this question? What do you do well? Those are the tools that you'll take into the practice room, and slowly but surely you'll have to revisit this thought. Is perfection an attainable goal in practice or performance? If so, if you think it is, then do you try to achieve perfection over emotional honesty? If the answer is the second part of that, then you may find that about 10 years into your career, you develop a rather bad experience with your performing. You've taken out the emotional thing that brought you to the performing career in the first place, the why. And you have replaced the why with an unattainable goal of perfection, thus removing the emotional connection you have and the audience will have to your music and your voice. Let's talk about your practice for a minute. What do you think about practice time? Has your teacher actually talked with you about how you divide up your practice? Have they talked to you practically? And have they talked to you philosophically about it? So let's think about this for a moment. When you enter the practice room, do you open up a toolbox and take out all your hammers and your knives and your sharp instruments, and that is the representation of your technique? Or do you go in there and you open up your toy box and you take out the toys and you begin to play with them? That leads me to the next part of this conversation, which is creative versus analytical energy when you're practicing. I call it the smart singer problem, because singers feel as though if they do more in the practice room, they're actually accomplishing more. The more thoughts you have, the better student you are, right? That's mastering your vocal technique. But can it be that too many thoughts actually spoil the voice? So let's talk about creative versus analytical energy. Two different sides of the brain, two different processes. I recently taught a master class in Huntsville, Alabama, and I asked the entire audience of about 90-something people, I said, tell me how many of you in this room are engineers and how many of you are scientists? And practically every hand in the room was raised. And I said, okay, let's think about this for a moment. Why do you sing? And most of them said, because it gives me a release, it makes me feel happy, non-scientific, non-analytical answers. Yet when they go to work every day, they use the analytical portion of their brain to create what it is that they create while they're on the job. When you go into a practice room, if you ask yourself this question, how much of time in practice do I spend listening to my sound versus feeling my sound? And by the way, this is a phenomenon more closely associated with singing than any other instrument. If you spend a lot of time listening to your sound more than feeling your vocal technique, then probably you spend a good deal of time analyzing the sound while you're doing it. But see, the process is different. Analysis is an energy that loops back into the body. Creativity is an energy that loops out. Guess what else? The act of giving, the act of creating, is an energy that moves out to the audience. So if you're in the practice room and you're practicing the act of analysis, where you're constantly inventorying your sound as you do it, then what happens is in your own physical body, you lose connection with a physical process that produces in you an emotional response, empathy. So if you spend more time in analysis in your lesson, chances are and in your practice times, chances are you'll leave and you'll be more frustrated. But creative energy is different. You can master your technique by thinking creatively. If your goal is to take the concepts that you took in your lesson, take them into the practice room and replicate them, you will be prone to analysis, and it's not a goal that you can attain. Instead, when you're in your lessons, consider what the physical truth is, the acoustic truth, the technical truth is that your teacher is trying to get across to, the artistic truth. And rather than trying to replicate exactly the experience that you had in the studio, why not go in there and figure out how your mind and your body interprets that physical truth And then instead of viewing it as a hammer and a saw to carve your technique and make it perfect, why don't you think of it as a toy? I did this in my lesson today. It felt like this. Let me play with this idea. Something beautiful will happen in that you will begin to perceive that your practice is something creative more than a chore or analytical. And that's a beautiful moment when you're able to create in your practice session. You will walk out of that room fully in touch with the why you want to do this for a living, because you just had a physical, empathetic, and emotional experience with your own voice. In the meantime, you were strengthening your technique as you did it. That causes me to bring up one last thing, and that is how you think about your voice. We tend to think about the voice as something that is fragile. It's like a small egg, and we walk into the practice room and we take the egg out of its crystal box and we say, have to be careful with eggs. And we put it down and we start to practice, and the minute we have any sensation that arises, we back off because it could be dangerous. I had a teacher tell me one time that for every cough I had, I took 10 years off of my career. If that were the case, I would not be singing at all right now. Luckily for me, that was not the case. So if you begin to practice and you think of your voice as inherently fragile, you will tend to analyze and you will tend to hold, and you won't allow yourself the physical sensations that embody good vocal technique that are also tied to the emotion and the intent of your voice. You cannot give a gift to a student that you have not allowed yourself to experience. It's a hollow word. So if you're a teacher, why don't you go into the practice room today, and why don't you, instead of trying to make perfection to impress, why don't you play with your toys? Breath is spirit. The voice is spirit. God gave you the toys. Play with them. See what happens. I'm Maryann Kyle. I'm glad to be with you today.